Hello, this is Todd Luck, and back in the 90s, Dark Horse gave my man Tarzan some frequent flyer miles for visiting other worlds. So he started out fighting Predator at the Earth's core. He went to Mars where he met John Carter, and he even ended up going to the future to fight the Moon Men. So what is one more trip to another world to team up with another Burroughs hero? And so it's time for Rocket Man meets Ape Man in Tarzan, Carson of Venus. This is a 4-issue miniseries released in 1998, written by Darko Matson and has artwork by Igor Corday. And so this is the same creative team behind Tarzan Telemugambi and Tarzan Rivers of Blood, which would be published the next year. And thank you to the viewer who left a comment in my Telemugambi review letting me know how to pronounce the names of the creators here, because sometimes online pronunciation guides are completely useless for certain names. But before we get started, did you know that at the same time the miniseries was coming out in 1998, that Dark Horse Presents had a serialized Carson of Venus story in it? So this story ran from issues 133 to 135 in Dark Horse Presents, and I only found out about this recently. And so the first part in Dark Horse Presents 133 actually has a Carson of Venus cover, and so this is done by the great Mike Kaluta, who did Carson of Venus comics back in the 70s for DC, and it looks wonderful. I believe this is probably supposed to be Carson of Venus having just crash landed on Venus, and it has nothing to do with the interior, but I believe this is probably, Carson with his wrecked ship, and then maybe Duari in the background. I'm not quite sure. I'm not high enough to understand a Mike Kaluta cover right now, but it is absolutely beautiful. The next part, Dark Horse Presents 134, doesn't have a Carson of Venus cover. It's got Dirty Pair for one cover, and then there's a flip cover for the mask. And this is the cover for the final part in Dark Horse Presents 135. So remember, the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. So this is indeed a Carson of Venus cover. You can't tell he's on Venus, but this definitely is a scene that happens in the story, and it is amazing. This is by Jeff Darrow, who did the classic Hardboiled and Big Guy comics with Frank Miller, and it is gorgeous. This is just a tremendous work of art. I would love to have the Virgin image of this and hang it on my wall. It is just beautiful. The artwork on the interior is also very impressive. This is done by Peter Doherty, and he is a British artist best known for his work on 2000 AD, and it is just absolutely gorgeous. So the story begins, of course, with Carson and his friends flying somewhere in Carson's plane. They get shot down, and Carson gets captured by this group of women who are at war with the men of this civilization. Princess Duari, of course, ends up parachuting into the city, which is controlled by men, and so Carson has to go and save her. And I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say there's an epic arena battle at the end. So all of the Amtorians that Carson meets in this story are human, and so this is really taking off on Burroughs's trope of parodying society using alien civilizations, like he did in some of the Venus novels and sometimes in some of the Mars novels as well. And it's just a clever, well-drawn, very enjoyable series. And I think it's kind of cool to do that social satire in this story, and then, leave your fantastic stuff for the main miniseries. And so let's talk about that miniseries, starting with the covers. The cover art is by Corday, the interior artist. And I gotta say, the covers don't necessarily capture the interiors or capture what Venus looks like very well. I can't even tell this is on another planet, but I do think this is the strongest cover because it is so colorful and it's attractive looking, and the plane looks really cool, even if I can't quite tell what's going on. What is going on is that they're being chased by another aircraft. Tarzan's on the wing, about to throw a spear at that aircraft. And there is an attempt to capture that, but unfortunately the other aircraft right here is covered up by the logo. It's been a couple decades, and I'm just now noticing that. The second cover is just weird. Yes, this scene does happen in the issue, but out of context, it really is not going to mean much to the reader. Um, the figures are drawn attractively. I mean, this is the most epic handstand that Tarzan's ever done, but it's just weird cover and again doesn't really capture Venus very well, though I will say the purple on here is very attractive. And here we have Tarzan running in a burning field with a torch and some characters from the issue. And again, attractive, but not necessarily something that would sell me on the issue. The fourth issue actually comes the closest to capturing Venus because at least we get one of the famous monsters that Burroughs created on the cover, and we can see him well, at least as far as the pencils go. But the coloring here is just really monotone, and everything is kind of the same shade of brown or brownish color or whatever this is. And so it just kind of blends in together. But you're not here for covers, kids. You're here for the interiors, which show a bright, beautiful, fantastic world for these two heroes to explore. And the artwork by Corday is wonderful. I mean, yeah, you could probably haggle over his stylization. He does get a little sketchy in the final issue, but when you see some of those gorgeous double-page splashes he does, you'll forgive him. The only thing that is really odd is Carson of Venus' outfit. Carson of Venus, like most of Burroughs' heroes, is an Earthman who ends up in a fantastic world and adapts the culture and customs of that world and also their dress. And that's how he's normally portrayed, as dressing like the people of Amtor, which is what they call Venus. I know this is probably a complete coincidence, but Carson of Venus' outfit in this miniseries really reminds me of Charlemagne, which was a series that was put out earlier in the 90s by Defiant Comics. Perhaps Carson wearing Earth clothes was inspired by his appearance in Tarzan the Epic Adventures, though in that episode it was a very different version of Amtor and a very different version of Carson. Honestly, it's just mysterious why he's dressed like this. It doesn't really bother me. I think the important thing is everything else in this miniseries. And this miniseries just has so much of the fantastic things that make Venus such an interesting place. We got your beastmen. We, of course, have our fishmen and even a fish woman here. We got our forest people, and of course, Tarzan gets to climb some giant trees on Venus. You get a new race of water people that are introduced that look really cool, and they ride around on giant turtles. And bonus points for that, because turtles are my favorite animal. And there's a brand new villain who also looks really cool. And the story is good too. So this uses a character named Betty Caldwell, who was in the Venus novels, and she had this mysterious ability to go back and forth between Venus and Earth. And so this comic presumes that there's a portal involved that Tarzan could get sucked into. And so that's how Tarzan gets to Venus. And so when Tarzan arrives on Venus, he helps Carson of Venus fight a monster. Finds out Carson is looking for his missing girlfriend, Princess Dewari, and they team up and they have a really high adventure filled with action, intrigue, plot twists, just a whole 9 yards. And they help save the planet together in a truly epic story that is filled with just wonderful, wonderful humor. This is probably one of my favorite panels of all time because in it, Carson is musing about how it's difficult to have the most beautiful woman on the planet as it's made because people want to kidnap and marry her all the time. And Tarzan says, "Don't I know it?" And sometimes humor like that is hard to pull off because a lot of people, when they're making fun of other writers' tropes, they'll end up coming off as condescending or they'll come off as kind of awkward or unnatural because they'll just be copying and pasting criticism they saw from a fan or a critic or something. But here it works really well. The humor feels natural. It feels like something that the characters would say, and it's funny, but it's not over the top or silly, and it just works really, really well throughout the story. And even though this does lean into the more fantastic elements of Venus, it still takes time to create situations that are identifiable to us Earthlings. Like the way that the villains want to conquer Venus is very reminiscent of some bad things that have happened on Earth. Some of the characters really do just hit some very human chords. Tarzan has an ability here to communicate and do a back and forth between animals on Venus that I don't really see him doing with animals other than simians on Earth. But boy, does it pay off in a big way in issue 3. And there's just a very, very powerful scene in here. And overall, all of these Carson of Venus comics by Dark Horse just had me grinning from ear to ear. I listened to the John Carter soundtrack while I was reading them, and it was just such a joy. I mean, these are just such great comics the entire run. And if you're thinking to yourself, it is a little weird that Carson of Venus has more new comics from Dark Horse than John Carter got. Well, Dark Horse was wanting to do more with John Carter. They did say in the Tarzan ongoing series letter column that they were taking proposals for a new John Carter, I guess, miniseries probably. But of course, that never happened, which is a shame. I mean, they did a great job with Carson of Venus, and even if Tarzan John Carter was a little bumpy, I'm sure they could have done the same thing with Mars. As far as other Carson of Venus comics go, DC Comics did do backup stories with Carson of Venus where they adapted the first 2 novels. And that first novel adaptation, Pirates of Venus, was reprinted as a 2-issue miniseries by American Mythology in recent years. American Mythology also did a series of new Carson of Venus comics, starting with the Fear on Four Worlds one-shot, which was continued into Carson of Venus, Realm of the Dead, which was a 3-issue miniseries. There's also the 3-issue miniseries, Carson of Venus to Flames Beyond, written by Christopher Paul Carey. The 3-issue miniseries, Eye of Amtor, which tied into the new novels. There was a one-shot called Princes of Venus, starring Dewari, and a one-shot where Carson of Venus teams up with the Warlord of Mars. And so all of the American Mythology comics are still available on American Mythology's website and Comixology. And there's been new Carson of Venus novels in recent years, including Carson of Venus, Edge of All Worlds, which is a Edgar Rice Burroughs universe novel that counts as official canon. And I've done reviews of all of that stuff that I just mentioned. And so what does the future hold for Carson of Venus? It's hard to say. There's been no new novels or graphic novels announced from Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. at this point, but I'm sure there will be in the future. Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. is, of course, a small company with a lot of characters, so you just have to give them time to get around to everybody. And so now there's only one mini-series from Dark Horse's Tarzan run in the 90s that I haven't done a review of. So next time I get to do a retro review, we'll be taking a look at Tarzan the Savage Heart. All right, like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.